The darkness of space stretched endlessly in all directions, punctuated only by the distant glow of stars and the occasional drift of cosmic debris. In this vast emptiness, something moved with purpose and malice. A fleet of massive ships, each one larger than most space stations, glided through the void with the silent grace of predators stalking their prey. Admiral Kethvar stood on the command bridge of the flagship Dominion's Fong, his forearms crossed behind his back as he stared out at the tactical display. The holographic projection showed their target system in detail, a small, unremarkable star with 9 planets orbiting it. The third planet from the star glowed blue and green, clearly inhabited and ripe for conquest. The hegemony had been expanding across the galaxy for over 3,000 years. They had conquered hundreds of civilizations, absorbed their technologies, enslaved their populations, and added their worlds to the ever-growing empire. This was just another routine conquest, another stepping stone in their march toward total galactic domination. Status report, Kethvar demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never known defeat. Commander Zixtal, his second-in-command, stepped forward. Her reptilian features showed the confidence that came from centuries of successful military campaigns. All ships are in position, Admiral. The fleet consists of 400 dreadnoughts, 2,000 cruisers, and 8,000 escort vessels. Our scout ships have confirmed the target system has only primitive defenses. Kethvar's mandibles clicked together in what passed for a smile among his species. Primitive indeed. According to our intelligence, these humans have barely managed to establish colonies on their neighboring planets. They still rely on chemical rockets for most of their space travel. This will be over before it begins. The tactical officer, a tall, insectoid creature with compound eyes, looked up from his station. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the target system. It appears to be directed at us, specifically. This was unusual. Most civilizations they encountered either tried to flee or immediately surrendered when they saw the size of the hegemony fleet. Very few were bold enough to actually attempt communication. Put it through, Kethvar ordered. The main view screen flickered to life, showing the image of a human male. He was middle-aged by their species standards, with graying hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of both wisdom and weariness. He wore what appeared to be a military uniform, simple but well-maintained. This is Admiral Jonathan Chun of the United Earth Defense Force, the human began, his voice calm and measured. I am addressing the approaching fleet on behalf of humanity and all inhabited worlds in this system. Kethvar found himself momentarily intrigued. Most species either begged for mercy or issued empty threats when faced with the hegemony's might. This human seemed to be doing neither. We know who you are, Admiral Chin continued. The hegemony has left a trail of conquered worlds and enslaved populations across the galaxy. Your reputation precedes you. However, I must inform you that this system is under the protection of humanity, and we cannot allow you to proceed with your intended conquest. Several officers on the bridge made sounds that could only be described as laughter. Commander Zixtal's eyes gleamed with amusement. Admiral, should we respond to this entertainment? But Kethvar held up a hand for silence. Something in the human's demeanor intrigued him. There was no fear in those eyes, no desperation, just a calm certainty that seemed completely at odds with the situation. Admiral Chin's image continued speaking. I'm therefore giving you this one opportunity to turn your fleet around and leave this system peacefully. This is not a threat or a bluff. This is a warning. If you continue on your current course, you will be stopped. The choice is yours. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence for a moment before erupting in laughter and mocking comments. Did that primitive just threaten us? Asked the tactical officer, his compound eyes literally sparkling with mirth. They must be insane, added the communications officer. Our scout reports show they have maybe 50 ships total in their entire system, and most of those are cargo vessels. Commander Zixtal stepped closer to the admiral. Shall I order the fleet to increase speed? We could reach their world within hours and put an end to this farce. Kethvar remained silent for a long moment, studying the now-blank view screen. In 3 millennia of conquest, he had developed an instinct for reading his enemies. Something about that human's confidence bothered him, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what. Admiral, Sixtal Promptiv, sent a response. Kethvar finally said, I want to hear what they think they can do to stop us. The communications officer quickly established a return channel. Kethvar stepped forward, his imposing 8-foot frame filling the camera's field of view. I am Admiral Kethvar of the Hegemony 4th Fleet, he began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Human Admiral Chun, I must commend you on your courage, even if it is foolishly misplaced. In 3,000 years of conquest, the hegemony has never been stopped by any force in the galaxy. We have destroyed civilizations far more advanced than your own. Your warning is noted and dismissed. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. However, I am curious. What exactly do you believe you can do with your handful of primitive vessels against a fleet of over 14,000 ships? The response came almost immediately. Admiral Chun appeared on screen again, and Kethvar noted with grudging respect that the humans still showed no sign of fear or uncertainty. Admiral Kethvar, Chen replied, I appreciate your directness. You ask what we can do. The answer is simple. We can defend our home. Humanity has faced extinction before, and we have always found a way to survive. We have learned that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from the size of your fleet or the power of your weapons, but from the determination to protect what matters most. Chun leaned slightly forward, and for the first time, Kethvar saw something in those human eyes that gave him pause. It wasn't fear or desperation. It was something far more dangerous. Absolute resolve. You see, Admiral, you made a fundamental error in your calculations. You've assumed that because we appear primitive, we are weak. You've assumed that because our technology seems limited, we have no advantages. But you haven't asked the most important question. And what question is that? Kethvar found himself asking, genuinely curious despite himself. You haven't asked why a species that you consider primitive would be so confident in the face of impossible odds. You haven't wondered how humans manage to survive and thrive in a galaxy full of threats. Most importantly, you haven't considered that maybe our apparent primitiveness is exactly what makes us dangerous. The transmission ended again, leaving Kethvar staring at the blank screen. Around him, his officers exchanged glances, some still amused, others beginning to show the first hints of uncertainty. Admiral, Commander Zixtal said carefully, surely you don't believe their bluster? Our intelligence clearly shows they have no significant military capability. Kethvar turned away from the view screen and walked to the tactical display. The holographic projection showed their massive fleet approaching the human system like an unstoppable tide. By all military logic, this should be the easiest conquest in hegemony history. So why did he feel like he was missing something crucial? Order long-range sensors to conduct a detailed sweep of the system, he commanded. I want to know the position and capability of every human vessel, every space station, every piece of technology they have. Admiral, we've already conducted 3 sweeps, the sensor officer reported. The results are always the same. They have approximately 50 ships, mostly cargo and civilian vessels. Perhaps 12 military vessels of primitive design. No significant orbital defenses around their homeworld. No evidence of advanced weaponry. Kethvar nodded slowly, but something still nagged at him. He had not survived 3,000 years of warfare by ignoring his instincts, and every instinct he possessed was telling him that something was wrong with this picture. What about the outer planets? He asked. Standard colonial settlements, the sensor officer replied. Some mining operations on the asteroid belt. A few research stations. Nothing that could pose any threat to the fleet. As if summoned by his thoughts, another transmission request came through. This time, it wasn't from Admiral Chun. The human on the screen was younger, perhaps in his 30s, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command, but without the weathered experience of the older admiral. "I am Captain Sarah Rodriguez of the Earth Defense Ship Defiance," the woman announced. "I'm speaking on behalf of the Colonial Defense Initiative." Kethvar studied this new human carefully. Like Admiral Chun, she showed no fear, but there was something different about her demeanor. Where Chun had been calm and diplomatic, this Captain Rodriguez radiated a barely contained energy that reminded Kethvar uncomfortably of a coiled spring. "Captain Rodriguez, Kethvar acknowledged. I assume you're here to deliver another warning?" "Actually, no," she replied, and there was something in her voice that made several of his officers look up from their stations. "I'm here to give you some free advice, Admiral. Turn around now, while you still can." The bridge erupted in laughter once again, but Kethvar noticed that Captain Rodriguez didn't seem bothered by their reaction. If anything, she looked almost pitying. "Captain, your concern for our welfare is touching, but unnecessary," Kethvar replied. "Perhaps you could explain what terrible fate awaits us if we ignore your advice." Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a note of genuine regret. "Admiral, how many species have you conquered in your 3,000 years of expansion?" The question caught Kethvar off guard. "Hundreds, perhaps over 1,000 by now." "What relevance does that have? And in all those conquests, how many species actually fought back effectively?" Kethvar found himself thinking. Very few. Most either surrender immediately or are crushed within days. And those few that did fight back, what happened to them? "They were destroyed more thoroughly than the others," Kethvar replied, beginning to wonder where this conversation was leading. Rodriguez nodded sadly. "That's what I thought. You see, Admiral, that's the difference between humanity and every other species you've encountered. Every other species you've conquered was afraid of extinction. They fought to avoid destruction. But humans, we've already faced extinction so many times that we've stopped being afraid of it." She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried a weight that made even the laughter on the bridge die away. "We've learned that the only way to truly defeat an enemy who threatens everything you love is to be willing to lose everything to stop them. Every other species you've conquered had something left to lose. Humans gave up the luxury of having anything left to lose long before you arrived." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in an uncomfortable silence. Commander Zixtal broke the quiet first. "Admiral, surely these are just words meant to unnerve us. Empty psychological tactics." But Kethvar was no longer so certain. Something about the way both humans had spoken, their absolute confidence in the face of impossible odds, reminded him of something he had encountered only once before in his long military career. It had been early in his service, during the conquest of a species known as the Kethani, ironically sharing part of his own name. The Kethani had been a proud warrior race, technologically advanced and militarily capable. When the hegemony arrived, they had expected a long, difficult campaign. Instead, the Kethani had fought with a desperation and ferocity that had shocked even veteran hegemony commanders. They had been willing to destroy their own worlds rather than let them be captured. They had sacrificed entire fleets in suicide attacks that accomplished nothing but delaying the inevitable. In the end, the hegemony had won, but it had been the costliest victory in their history up to that point. The difference was that the Kethani had been desperate. These humans didn't sound desperate at all. They sounded certain. "Sir, we're receiving another transmission," the communications officer announced, interrupting Kethvar's troubled thoughts. "From the humans again?" "No, sir. This one is coming from, well, it appears to be coming from everywhere in the system simultaneously." Kethvar frovnid. "Explain." "The transmission is being broadcast from multiple sources throughout the system. Some from their planets, some from ships, some from what appear to be unmanned platforms scattered throughout the asteroid belt. They're all broadcasting the same message simultaneously." This was definitely unusual. Kethvar had never encountered a species that could coordinate communications across an entire star system so precisely. "Put it through." The view screen activated, but instead of showing a single human, it showed a split-screen image with dozens of different humans. Men and women of various ages, some in military uniforms, others in civilian clothes. Some appear to be on ships, others in what looked like command centers, or even private homes. The effect was disconcerting. Instead of speaking to one representative or leader, Kethvar found himself facing what appeared to be an entire species speaking with one voice. One of the humans, an elderly woman with silver hair, spoke first. "Admiral Kethvar, I am Director Elizabeth Warren of the Mars Colonial Government." Another human, a young man who couldn't have been more than 25, spoke next. "I am Lieutenant Commander Michael Chong of the Asteroid Mining Patrol." A third voice joined in, belonging to a middle-aged woman in civilian clothes. "I am Dr. Priya Patel, representing the scientific communities of the outer colonies." More voices joined in, one after another, until dozens of humans were speaking in sequence, each identifying themselves and their role. What struck Kethvar as significant was that none of them were begging or threatening. They were simply introducing themselves, as if this were a formal diplomatic meeting rather than a confrontation between a massive invasion fleet and a small, primitive star system. Finally, Admiral Chen's voice rose above the others. "Admiral Kethvar, what you're seeing is something that has never existed in your 3,000 years of conquest. You're seeing an entire species that has chosen to stand together. Not because we're forced to, not because we have no choice, but because we believe there are things worth dying for." Director Warren spoke next. "You see, Admiral, humans have an unusual relationship with impossible odds. Throughout our history, we've faced extinction events, natural disasters, wars, plagues, and challenges that should have wiped us out dozens of times over." Lieutenant Commander Chong picked up the thread. "Each time we faced extinction, we learned something valuable. We learned that individual survival isn't as important as species survival. We learned that sometimes the only way to protect future generations is to sacrifice the current one." Dr. Patel's voice was calm and scientific as she continued. "But most importantly, we learned that the greatest weapon any species can possess isn't superior technology or overwhelming numbers. It's the absolute certainty that your cause is just and your sacrifice has meaning." Kethvar felt a chill run down his spine as the implications of what he was hearing began to sink in. This wasn't a military briefing or a diplomatic negotiation. This was an entire species calmly explaining why they were prepared to fight to the death against impossible odds. Admiral Chen's voice rose above the others one final time. "Admiral, I'm going to share something with you that our intelligence services have learned about the hegemony. In your 3,000 years of conquest, you have never faced a species that was truly prepared to accept total annihilation to stop you. Every species you've conquered has ultimately chosen survival over resistance when faced with the choice." The elderly Director Warren leaned forward slightly. "Humanity is different, Admiral. We've already made that choice. We've chosen resistance over survival. Whether we win or lose tomorrow is far less important to us than ensuring that some truths remain true." As if responding to some unseen signal, every human on the screen spoke in unison. "We are human. We do not yield. We do not surrender. And we do not forget." The transmission ended, leaving the hegemony bridge in absolute silence. For long minutes, nobody spoke. The implications of what they had just witnessed were too enormous to process immediately. This wasn't just a species preparing to resist conquest. This was a species that had mentally prepared itself for extinction and found peace with that possibility. Commander Zixtao was the first to break the silence, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Admiral, what are your orders?" Kethvar stared at the blank view screen for a long time before responding. Every instinct he had developed over millennia of successful warfare was screaming warnings at him. Something was wrong here. Something was very, very wrong. But he was Admiral of the Fourth Fleet, commander of over 14,000 ships, representative of the most powerful military force in galactic history. He could not show uncertainty in front of his officers. "Continue on course," he ordered, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Maintain standard approach formation. All ships to battle readiness." As the orders were relayed throughout the fleet, Kethvar found himself staring out at the stars and wondering if he was about to make the greatest mistake of his long career. Behind him, his officers busied themselves with preparations for what should be a routine conquest. None of them noticed their admiral's troubled expression, or the way he kept staring at the tactical display, as if searching for something he couldn't quite identify. In the depths of space, the massive hegemony fleet continued its inexorable advance toward the human system, while in that same system, an apparently primitive species made its own final preparations for what they knew would be either humanity's greatest victory or its final stand. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reshape both species' understanding of what it meant to face an impossible enemy. The command center, buried 3 kilometers beneath the Swiss Alps, hummed with quiet efficiency. Admiral Jonathan Chun stood before a massive holographic display that showed the approaching hegemony fleet in real time, their ships appearing as red dots against the star field. The display was fed by a network of sensors and observation platforms that have been secretly deployed throughout the system over the past decade. "Time to contact?" Chun asked quietly. 18 hours, 37 minutes, replied Colonel Martinez, his aide-de-camp. "They're maintaining their approach vector. No deviation from predicted course." Chun nodded, unsurprised. The hegemony had never faced serious resistance before. Why should they expect it now? Status on Operation Prometheus? All platforms are operational and fully charged. Dr. Petrov confirms that the gravitational lensing arrays are functioning within acceptable parameters. We have clear targeting solutions on 97% of their fleet. Chun allowed himself a slight smile. The hegemony's sensors were impressive by galactic standards, but they were designed to detect conventional threats. Ships, space stations, traditional weapons platforms. They were not designed to detect what humanity had actually built. Dr. Sarah Petrov emerged from the depths of the command center, her face showing the exhaustion of someone who had been working for 48 hours straight. As humanity's foremost expert on exotic physics and the chief architect of their defense system, she had been under enormous pressure to ensure everything was ready. "Admiral," she said, her Russian accent still noticeable after decades of living on Earth, "I need to brief you on the final operational parameters." Chun turned from the display to give her his full attention. "Go ahead, Doctor." Petrov activated a smaller holographic display that showed a technical schematic. The quantum entanglement network is operating at full efficiency. All 643 platforms are linked and responding to central command. The exotic matter reserves are stable, and the gravitational field generators are ready for activation on your signal. She paused, her expression becoming more serious. "Admiral, I need you to understand what we're about to do. This isn't just advanced technology. This is physics pushed beyond the theoretical limits that most species consider possible. The energy requirements alone." "Doctor," Chun interrupted gently, "how certain are you that this will work?" Petrov was quiet for a moment, then spoke with the precision of a scientist who had checked and double-checked every calculation. "Based on our testing and simulations, there's a 93% probability that the initial activation will succeed as designed. The probability of total system failure is less than 2%. And the other 5% represents scenarios we haven't been able to test in a safe environment. Theoretical possibilities that could range from partial failure to..." She hesitated. "To what, Doctor?" "To effects that could be visible from other star systems," she admitted. Chun absorbed this information without visible concern. "Acceptable parameters, Doctor. Proceed with final preparations." As Petrov returned to her work, Chun's thoughts turned to the conversation he had had with the Global Defense Council just hours earlier. The representatives of every major nation and colony had gathered virtually to give final approval for humanity's response to the hegemony threat. The The debate had been surprisingly brief. When faced with the choice between almost certain death and possible survival at the cost of revealing humanity's greatest secret, the choice had been unanimous. Humanity had been preparing for this moment for over 50 years. It had all begun with the Kepler Deep Space Observatory, when Dr. Amanda Richards had detected the first evidence of large-scale stellar engineering in distant galaxies. Further investigation had revealed the truth. Humanity was not alone in the universe, and they were far from being the most advanced species. The discovery had triggered the most ambitious secret project in human history. The Global Defense Initiative had been established with a single mandate: ensure humanity's survival when contact with advanced alien civilizations inevitably occurred. The first breakthrough had come from an unexpected source. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a theoretical physicist studying exotic matter, had discovered that quantum entanglement could be weaponized in ways that conventional physics suggested should be impossible. Her work had led to the development of the first practical faster-than-light communication system. But, more importantly, it had opened the door to technologies that operated outside the normal constraints of space and time. The second breakthrough had been even more revolutionary. Dr. Petrov, working with a team of international scientists, had discovered how to create controlled gravitational anomalies using quantum field manipulation. The implications had been staggering. It was possible to create localized distortions in space-time that could affect matter and energy across vast distances. The third and final breakthrough had come from an unexpected collaboration between military strategists and quantum physicists. If you could create gravitational anomalies, and if you could link those anomalies through quantum entanglement, then you could theoretically create a weapon system that could strike anywhere in a star system simultaneously, regardless of the speed of light. The project had required the construction of platforms throughout the solar system, each one equipped with exotic matter generators and quantum entanglement transmitters. The platforms had been disguised as routine mining equipment, research stations, and communication relays. Even the hegemony's advanced sensors had classified them as primitive human infrastructure. It had taken 50 years, the combined resources of every major nation on Earth, and the total commitment of humanity's best scientific minds. But they had done it. They had created a defensive system unlike anything that had ever existed in galactic history. Now, they would find out if it worked. Admiral, Colonel Martinez called from the communication station. We're receiving a priority transmission from Captain Rodriguez aboard the Defiance. Chen walked over to the communications console. Put her through. Captain Sarah Rodriguez appeared on the screen, and Chen could see the bridge of the Defiance behind her. The ship was part of the visible human fleet, the conventional vessels that the hegemony had detected and dismissed as primitive. Admiral, we're in position at the designated coordinates, Rodriguez reported. All ships in the visible fleet are ready to play their part. Chen nodded. The visible fleet was crucial to the plan, but not in the way the hegemony expected. Their job wasn't to fight the alien fleet directly. Their job was to ensure that when humanity revealed its true capabilities, the hegemony fleet would be in exactly the right position. Captain, you and your crews understand the risks? Rodriguez's expression was grim but determined. We understand, Admiral. If this goes wrong, we're likely to be the first casualties. But if it goes right, well, we'll have front row seats to the most spectacular military engagement in human history. She paused, then added, Admiral, the crews want you to know we're honored to be part of this. Whatever happens today, humanity will never forget what we tried to do. Chun felt a surge of pride in his species. These brave men and women were flying ships that they knew were hopelessly outmatched, positioned between Earth and an invasion fleet that could annihilate them in seconds. And they were doing it willingly because they believed in what humanity was fighting for. The honor is ours, Captain. Humanity's finest are out there with you. The transmission ended, and Chen returned to the main tactical display. The hegemony fleet was now close enough that individual ship classes could be identified. Dreadnoughts the size of cities, cruisers larger than Earth space stations, and escort vessels that could each destroy a human city with a single volley. Dr. Petrov, Chun called, "What's the status on the exotic matter reserves?" "Fully charged and stable, Admiral. All platforms report ready for immediate activation." Chun took a deep breath. In a few hours, humanity would either achieve the impossible or face extinction. There was no middle ground, no possibility of surrender or negotiation. The hegemony had never left conquered populations alive when they encountered serious resistance. Colonel Martinez, signal all platforms. Initiate final countdown sequence. Yes, sir. As the final countdown began, Chun allowed his thoughts to drift to the generations of humans who had lived and died never knowing that their species was preparing for this moment. They had lived their lives believing they were alone in the universe, never suspecting that their children and grandchildren would one day face the ultimate test of human survival. Thousands of years of human history had led to this point. Every war, every scientific breakthrough, every moment of courage and determination had contributed to humanity's ability to stand here today and refuse to yield to a force that had conquered 1,000 other species. The irony wasn't lost on him. The hegemony thought they were facing a primitive species with limited technology. In reality, they were facing a species that had devoted 50 years to developing weapons and tactics specifically designed to destroy fleets exactly like theirs. "Admiral," the sensor officer called out, "the hegemony fleet has entered the outer detection perimeter. They're beginning active scans of the system. Any change in their formation?" "No, sir. They're maintaining standard conquest formation. Maximum intimidation display, minimal defensive posture." Chun almost smiled. The hegemony's arrogance would be their downfall. They were so accustomed to easy victories that they had never developed tactics for facing a truly dangerous enemy. "Dr. Petrov, initiate preliminary charge sequence on all gravitational field generators." "Charging now, Admiral. Estimated time to full charge, 4 hours, 17 minutes. Chun watched the holographic display as the enemy fleet drew closer to Earth. Soon, very soon, they would discover that humanity was far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. In the depths of space, Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of the Dominion's Fong, reviewing the latest sensor reports from his fleet. The human system was exactly as his intelligence had predicted: a small number of primitive vessels, minimal orbital defenses, and no evidence of advanced military technology. And yet he remained troubled. "Commander Zixtao," he called to his second-in-command, "have our scouts detected any unusual energy readings in the system?" Zixtao consulted her data tablet. "Negative, Admiral. All energy signatures are consistent with primitive human technology. Fusion reactors, chemical propulsion systems, basic electromagnetic communications. Nothing that poses any threat to the fleet." Kethvar nodded, but his unease persisted. In his centuries of military service, he had learned to trust his instincts. And his instincts were telling him that something was very wrong with this picture. What about their deployment patterns? Are their ships positioned defensively? "Admiral, their ships don't appear to be positioned at all. They seem to be scattered randomly throughout the system, with no apparent tactical coordination. Most appear to be civilian vessels continuing normal operations." This was what bothered Kethvar most. Every other species the hegemony had encountered had responded to their approach with either panic or desperate defensive preparations. The humans seemed to be waiting. "Sir," the communications officer interrupted his thoughts, "we're receiving another transmission from the human fleet." Kethvar sighed. "Put it through." The view screen activated, showing Admiral Chun once again. The human looked exactly as calm and confident as he had in their previous conversations. "Admiral Kethvar," Chun began, "I hope you've used the travel time to reconsider our earlier conversation." "Admiral Chen," Kethvar replied, "I must admit I'm curious. Your species continues to show remarkable composure in the face of certain destruction. Tell me, do your people truly not understand the hopelessness of your situation?" Chen was quiet for a moment, and When he spoke, his voice carried a note of what almost sounded like sadness. "Admiral, may I ask you something? In your 3,000 years of conquest, have you ever wondered what it would be like to face an enemy that was truly prepared for you?" The question caught Kethvar off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean an enemy that has studied your tactics, analyzed your weaknesses, and developed specific countermeasures for everything you can do. An enemy that has spent decades preparing for exactly this confrontation." Kethvar felt a chill run down his spine. "That's impossible. Your species has only been aware of our existence for a few months." Chin's expression became almost pitying. "Admiral, with respect, that's not true. Humanity has known about the hegemony for over 50 years. We've been preparing for this day since long before you decided to target our system." The bridge of the Dominion's Fong erupted in shocked murmurs. Commander Zixtao stepped forward, her voice sharp with disbelief. "That's impossible. Our intelligence indicates that humans only achieved interstellar communication 3 years ago." Chen's image on the screen actually smiled slightly. "Commander, your intelligence is based on what we wanted you to see. Did you really think a species capable of establishing interplanetary colonies wouldn't be capable of basic deception?" Kethvar felt the first stirrings of real concern. "Explain yourself, Admiral." "It's quite simple, really. When we first detected evidence of advanced civilizations in the galaxy, we realized that our survival would depend on never appearing to be a threat until we were ready to defend ourselves. So we developed 2 separate technological paths. One visible, deliberately primitive, designed to make species like yours underestimate us. And one hidden, focused entirely on developing the means to destroy invasion fleets exactly like yours." Kethvar felt his mandibles click nervously. "You're bluffing. Our sensors would have detected advanced weapon systems." "Would they?" Chen asked mildly. "Admiral, your sensors are designed to detect conventional threats. Energy weapons, kinetic projectiles, nuclear devices. But what if we had developed weapons that operate on principles your sensors weren't designed to recognize?" The tactical officer looked up from his station, his compound eyes wide with sudden alarm. "Admiral, I'm detecting some unusual readings from the asteroid's belt." "What kind of readings?" I'm not sure, sir. The energy signatures don't match anything in our database. It's almost like the quantum field fluctuations are synchronized." Chen's voice drew Kethvar's attention back to the view screen. "Admiral, I'm going to give you one final opportunity to withdraw your fleet. Not because I believe you'll take it, but because when this is over, I want the surviving members of your species to understand that we gave you every chance to avoid what's about to happen." "And what exactly is about to happen?" Kethvar demanded. Chen's expression became grave. "Admiral, your species has spent 3,000 years perfecting the art of conquest. In that same period, humanity has perfected the art of killing things that try to conquer us." The transmission ended, leaving the hegemony bridge in tense silence. Commander Zixtao was the first to speak. "Admiral, even if they have some kind of hidden weapons, our fleet consists of over 14,000 ships. No single star system could possibly—" "Sir," the tactical officer interrupted urgently. "I'm reading massive energy buildups throughout the system. The quantum fluctuations are intensifying." Kethvar spun toward the tactical display. "Show me." The holographic projection updated, and what Kethvar saw made his blood run cold. Throughout the human system, dozens of energy signatures were appearing, each one registering power levels that should have been impossible for a supposedly primitive civilization. "Where are those readings coming from?" "Unknown, sir. They're not corresponding to any physical structures our sensors can detect. It's like the energy is being generated from empty space." Before Kethvar could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. The lights on the bridge flickered as the ship's defensive systems automatically activated. "Report." Kethvar barked. "Admiral," the sensor officer called out, his voice tight with fear, "I'm reading gravitational anomalies forming around the fleet." "Multiple anomalies, sir. They're everywhere." Kethvar stared at the tactical display in growing horror as dozens of gravitational distortions began appearing throughout his fleet's formation. The anomalies were small at first, barely detectable, but they were growing rapidly. "Evasive maneuvers," he ordered. "All ships, maximum acceleration, break formation." But even as he gave the orders, Kethvar realized with sick certainty that it was too late. The gravitational anomalies weren't random. They were positioned with surgical precision, cutting off every possible escape route. On Earth, Admiral Chun watched the tactical display as the hegemony fleet began to react to the gravitational fields forming around them. "Dr. Petrov," he said calmly, "initiate Phase 1 of Operation Prometheus." "Initiating Phase 1, Petrov confirmed. Gravitational field strength increasing to level 3. Fleet mobility now reduced by 60%. Chun watched with grim satisfaction as the massive hegemony ships began to slow, their engines straining against gravitational forces that were growing stronger by the second. The aliens were learning the hard way that it was much easier to enter a gravity well than to escape from one. "Communications, patch me through to the hegemony flagship." Moments later, Admiral Kethvar's image appeared on the screen. The alien admiral's composure was beginning to crack, and Chun could see fear starting to show in those alien eyes. "What are you doing to my fleet?" Kethvar demanded. "We're demonstrating something that your species never learned, Admiral," Chun replied. "Sometimes the best way to defeat a superior force isn't to meet it head-on. Sometimes the best strategy is to trap it and then destroy it piece by piece. This is impossible. Gravitational manipulation on this scale requires energy output equivalent to a stellar core." Chun nodded. "You're absolutely correct, which is why we spent 50 years developing quantum entanglement arrays that can tap directly into our sun's energy output and redirect it through space-time." The look of dawning horror on Kethvar's face was almost pitying. "You see, Admiral, the problem with being an ancient, successful military force is that you become predictable. We knew exactly how you would approach our system. We knew exactly what formation you would use. And we built our defensive system specifically to exploit those predictable tactics." Kethvar's voice was hoarse with shock. You planned this entire engagement?" "Every detail," Chun confirmed. "From the moment your fleet entered our sensor range, you've been flying into a carefully prepared trap. The only question now is whether you'd prefer to surrender your surviving ships or continue fighting until we're forced to destroy them all." The transmission cut out as Kethvar turned to deal with the crisis on his bridge. Chun watched the tactical display as the hegemony fleet struggled against the gravitational fields that were slowly crushing them into a tighter and tighter formation. "Dr. Petrov, what's our power consumption level?" 37% of available reserves, she reported. "All platforms are operating within normal parameters. No sign of system strain." Chun nodded. The beauty of their system was its efficiency. By using quantum entanglement to distribute the power load across hundreds of platforms, they could sustain energy outputs that would normally require the industrial capacity of an entire star system. "Admiral," Colonel Martinez called from the communication station, "Captain Rodriguez is requesting permission to move the visible fleet to Phase 2 positions." "Granted. Signal all conventional vessels to begin Phase 2 deployment." On the view screen, Chun watched as the human ships that the hegemony had dismissed as primitive began moving into new positions. Their role was about to become crucial. In space, the Defiance accelerated toward the trapped hegemony fleet, along with the rest of humanity's visible naval forces. Captain Rodriguez stood on her bridge, watching as the massive alien ships grew larger in her view screen. "Ma'am," her tactical officer reported, "the gravitational fields are holding steady. Enemy fleet mobility is down to less than 20% of normal." Rodriguez nodded. "Signal the fleet. Begin Phase 2 of the operation." Throughout the human formation, ships that had appeared to be ordinary military vessels suddenly revealed their true capabilities. Weapon ports opened to reveal devices that looked unlike anything in known galactic military technology. Energy signatures that had been carefully masked suddenly blazed to life. "Target the enemy escorts first," Rodriguez ordered. "Let's show them what human weapons can really do when we stop pretending to be primitive." The first human weapons fired, and Admiral Kethvar watched in disbelief as beams of coherent gravitational energy sliced through his escort ships like they were made of paper. The alien vessels didn't just explode. They were torn apart at the molecular level as localized space-time distortions ripped through their hulls. "Return fire," Kethvar ordered desperately. "All ships, target the human vessels." The hegemony fleet opened fire with everything they had. Energy beams, kinetic projectiles, and plasma cannons filled the space between the two fleets. It should have been enough firepower to obliterate the small human force in seconds. Instead, Kethvar watched in horror as the human ships seemed to dance between the incoming fire, moving with impossible precision and speed. Shots that should have been direct hits passed harmlessly through empty space as the human vessels slipped between dimensions, using the same gravitational manipulation technology that was trapping his fleet. "Sir," his tactical officer called out desperately, "the human ships are phase-shifting. They're using controlled gravitational fields to slip in and out of normal space-time." Kethvar stared at the battle display as his fleet was systematically dismantled by an enemy that could apparently exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. This wasn't just advanced technology. This was physics pushed beyond what any known species had ever achieved. "Open a channel to all ships," he ordered grimly. "Prepare for ramming attacks. If we're going to die, we'll take some of them with us." But even as he gave the order, Kethvar knew it was futile. You couldn't ram a ship that could phase out of normal space-time whenever it chose. On Earth, Admiral Chun watched the battle unfold exactly as his strategists had predicted. The hegemony fleet was trapped, outmaneuvered, and completely outclassed by technology they had never encountered before. "Dr. Petrov," he said quietly, "prepare for Phase 3. It's time to end this." "Phase 3 ready, Admiral. All platforms report full charge and ready for final activation." Chin took a deep breath. Phase 3 would be the most dramatic demonstration of human capabilities and also the most dangerous. If something went wrong at this stage, the energy release could sterilize their entire solar system. Execute Phase 3. Throughout the solar system, hundreds of hidden platforms suddenly revealed their true purpose. Massive gravitational lenses began focusing energy directly from the sun, creating weapons that could project stellar-level destruction across interplanetary distances. Admiral Kethvar watched his fleet die. One by one, his great dreadnoughts were being destroyed by beams of concentrated solar energy that punched through their armor like it was tissue paper. Ships that had conquered worlds were reduced to vapor in seconds. "Admiral," Commander Zixtal called out desperately, "we need to retreat. We need to warn the hegemony about these humans." Kethvar looked around his bridge at the faces of his officers. For the first time in his 3,000-year career, he was facing total defeat. Not just a setback or a costly victory, but complete and utter annihilation. "Transmit all sensor data to Hegemony Command," he ordered quietly. "Make sure they understand what we've encountered here. Sir, we can still escape if we abandon the fleet and take only the fastest ships." "No," Kethvar said firmly. "We came here to conquer this species. Now we'll serve a different purpose. We'll make sure the hegemony understands exactly what humanity is capable of." He turned to the communications officer. "Open a final channel to the human admiral." Moments later, Admiral Chin's face appeared on the view screen. The human looked neither victorious nor cruel, just deeply tired. "Admiral Kethvar," Chin said quietly, "I take no pleasure in this destruction." "Then why?" Kethvar asked. "Why develop such terrible weapons? Why not simply hide? Your technology is advanced enough that you could have remained undetected indefinitely." Chin was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Because hiding would only have delayed the inevitable. Sooner or later, the hegemony would have found us. And when that happened, we wanted to be ready to send a message that the entire galaxy would understand. And what message is that? That there are some species that will never yield, no matter the cost. That there are some values worth dying for. And that any force that threatens humanity will face consequences beyond anything they can imagine. Chen paused, then added, "Admiral, in a few moments, your ship will be destroyed along with the rest of your fleet. But I want you to know that your courage in the face of impossible odds has earned my respect. You fought well for a cause you believed in." Kethvar felt a strange sense of peace descend over him. "Admiral Chun, may I offer you some advice?" "Of course. The hegemony will not stop with this defeat. They will send larger fleets, more advanced weapons. Eventually, they will find a way to defeat even your incredible technology." Chen nodded gravely. "I know. We're prepared for that possibility. And when that day comes..." Chen's expression became absolutely resolute. "When that day comes, Admiral, humanity will remind the galaxy once again that some things are worth any sacrifice to preserve." The transmission ended just as a beam of concentrated solar energy reached the Dominion's fawn. Admiral Kethvar had just enough time to reflect on the strange irony that he had finally encountered the one thing that had always eluded him in 3,000 years of conquest, an enemy worthy of respect. Then, the flagship of the Hegemony Fourth Fleet ceased to exist. Admiral Chun watched the last of the alien ships disappear from the tactical display. In less than 6 hours, humanity had destroyed one of the most powerful military forces in galactic history. "Casualty report?" he asked quietly. "Minimal human losses, Admiral," Colonel Martinez reported. 3 ships sustained damage from enemy fire. "No loss of life. All platforms remain operational." Chen nodded, but felt no satisfaction in the victory. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Dr. Petrov began power-down sequence for all platforms. Colonel Martinez signaled the fleet to begin recovery operations. "I want every piece of alien technology retrieved and analyzed." "Yes, sir." As his officers busied themselves with post-battle procedures, Chen stared out at the stars and wondered what the hegemony's response would be to the destruction of an entire fleet. Whatever came next, humanity would be ready. They had spent 50 years preparing for this day. Now, they would begin preparing for the next one. The Grand Assembly of the Hegemony had not been called to emergency session in over 2 centuries. The vast chamber, carved from a single asteroid and capable of holding representatives from 10,000 different worlds, buzzed with confused and anxious energy as delegates tried to understand why they had been summoned with such urgency. Supreme Commander Vexnathy stood at the center of the assembly floor, his massive form towering over the gathered delegates. As the supreme military authority of the hegemony, he had commanded fleets that had conquered entire star sectors. His reputation was built on 3 millennia of unbroken victory. Today, for the first time in his extraordinarily long career, he had to report a defeat. "Representatives of the hegemony," his voice boomed across the chamber, amplified by acoustic technology that ensured every word reached every delegate clearly. "I have called this emergency session to inform you of a situation that threatens the very foundation of our empire." The murmur of conversation died away as thousands of alien representatives focused their attention on the Supreme Commander. 72 hours ago, we lost contact with the Fourth Fleet under Admiral Kethvar. The fleet consisted of 14,307 vessels, including our newest dreadnoughts and most advanced battle cruisers. A shocked silence fell over the assembly. Individual ships were occasionally lost to accidents or unforeseen circumstances, but an entire fleet? It was unprecedented. The Fourth Fleet was conducting a routine conquest operation in a system designated as Target 2847, inhabited by a primitive species known as humans. Initial intelligence indicated standard resistance capability, minimal technology, limited military assets, no significant defensive infrastructure. Representative Korth of the vegan systems raised one of his 4 arms. Supreme Commander, are you suggesting the entire Fourth Fleet was destroyed by primitives? Vexnathi's expression remained carefully neutral. Representative Korth, before I answer that question, I believe the Assembly should review the final transmission we received from Admiral Kethvar. The chamber's massive holographic display system activated, showing the image of Admiral Kethvar on the bridge of the Dominion's Fong. The transmission was clearly made during combat, with alarm sounds and the flicker of damaged lighting visible in the background. Kethvar's voice, normally commanding and confident, carried notes of disbelief and shock. Hegemony Command. This is Admiral Kethvar reporting final status of the Fourth Fleet. We have encountered unprecedented resistance from the human species. The image flickered as another explosion rocked the ship. Supreme Commander, our initial intelligence was catastrophically incorrect. The humans possess technology far beyond anything in our databases. They have demonstrated the ability to manipulate gravitational fields on a system-wide scale, phase shift their vessels in and out of normal space-time, and project stellar-level energy across interplanetary distances. A collective gasp arose from the Assembly. Such technologies were purely theoretical, even for the hegemony's most advanced scientists. The entire fleet is trapped in artificially generated gravitational fields, Kethvar continued. We cannot escape, and we cannot effectively return fire. They are destroying our ships systematically, using weapons that operate on principles we do not understand. The transmission showed another violent explosion, and several of Kethvar's officers could be seen desperately working at damage control stations. Supreme Commander, I'm transmitting all sensor data and tactical analysis. The humans are not primitive. They have been deliberately concealing their capabilities while preparing specifically for our arrival. This was not a conquest operation. This was a carefully planned ambush designed to destroy our entire fleet. The image stabilized momentarily, and Kethvar looked directly into the camera with the calm resolve of a career military officer facing his final moments. I recommend immediate reassessment of human capabilities and threat level. Do not underestimate this species. They have turned our own predictability against us, and they possess weapons that can destroy fleets of our size without significant loss to their own forces. A brilliant light began to fill the transmission, growing brighter by the second. Tell the hegemony that we died fighting against the most dangerous enemy we have ever encountered. Tell them that humanity must never be allowed to. The transmission cut to static. The assembly chamber remained silent for long minutes as delegates processed what they had just witnessed. Finally, Representative Korth spoke again, his voice uncertain. Supreme Commander, is it possible that Admiral Kethvar was mistaken? Perhaps the transmission was fabricated by the humans as psychological warfare. Vexnathi activated another display, this one showing detailed sensor logs. Representative, we have confirmed the destruction of the Fourth Fleet through long-range observation. Every ship was completely destroyed within a 6-hour period. Additionally, we have analyzed the sensor data transmitted by Admiral Kethvar. The energy signatures and technological capabilities described in his report are genuine. Representative Zilterra of the Core Worlds stood, her crystalline form refracting light as she spoke. Supreme Commander, even if we accept that this species possesses advanced technology, surely it's impossible for them to pose a serious threat to the hegemony as a whole. They control only one star system. That is a complicated question, Vexnathi admitted. Our analysis suggests that their technology operates on principles that could potentially scale to larger applications. If they can manipulate gravitational fields and tap stellar energy sources, there are theoretical limits to what they might be capable of. Representative Mothkar of the Eastern Territories stepped forward. Supreme Commander, what are you recommending? Surely we cannot allow a single species to destroy an entire fleet without consequences. Vexnathi had been dreading this question. As Supreme Military Commander, his reputation and authority depended on maintaining hegemony dominance throughout the galaxy. But as a strategist with thousands of years of experience, he understood when caution was necessary. The military council has developed several response options, he announced. Option 1. Immediate mobilization of the First Fleet for a full-scale assault on the human system. The First Fleet consists of over 30,000 vessels, including our most advanced battleships and experimental weapons platforms. Murmurs of approval arose from several sections of the Assembly. The First Fleet represented the pinnacle of hegemony military power. Option 2. Deployment of multiple fleets in a coordinated assault, overwhelming their defenses through sheer numbers. We could potentially mobilize over 100,000 vessels for such an operation. The murmurs grew louder. The idea of deploying such overwhelming force was appealing to delegates who were still struggling to accept that any species could destroy a hegemony fleet. Option 3. Vexnethi continued, and the chamber fell silent as they detected something different in his tone. Diplomatic contact to assess their intentions and capabilities before committing additional military resources. The chamber erupted in angry shouts and protests. The idea of negotiating with a species that had destroyed a hegemony fleet was anathema to everything the Empire represented. Representative Kortha's voice rose above the others. Supreme Commander, the hegemony does not negotiate with primitives. Our reputation depends on swift and overwhelming response to any resistance. With respect, Representative, Vexnethi replied, his voice carrying the authority of supreme command. This species has demonstrated that they are far from primitive, and our reputation will suffer far more from the loss of additional fleets than from a strategic reassessment of our approach. Representative Ziltura's crystalline form pulsed with angry light. Are you suggesting that the hegemony should fear these humans? Vexnethi was quiet for a long moment, considering his words carefully. What he said next would shape the hegemony's response and potentially determine the fate of both species. Representatives, I am suggesting that we should respect them, he said finally. In 3,000 years of conquest, we have never encountered a species that could destroy an entire fleet while suffering minimal casualties themselves. That achievement demands respect, regardless of how we ultimately choose to respond. The chamber erupted in argument as delegates debated the unprecedented situation. After hours of heated discussion, a vote was called. The result was decisive. The Assembly voted to authorize the deployment of the First Fleet for immediate assault on the human system. Supreme Commander Vexnethi accepted the decision with the stoicism of a career military officer, but privately, he feared they were making a catastrophic mistake. On Earth, the underground command center buzzed with activity as humanity's leadership grappled with the implications of their unprecedented victory. Admiral Chun stood before the same holographic display that had tracked the destruction of the Hegemony Fourth Fleet, but now it showed something far more ominous. Massive fleet movements throughout hegemony space. How long until they arrive? Chun asked Dr. Petrov, who was studying the latest intelligence reports. Based on their standard fleet deployment patterns, approximately 6 weeks, she replied. But, Admiral, the size of the force they're assembling, it's unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Chun nodded grimly. Their success against the Fourth Fleet had bought them time, but it had also ensured that the hegemony's response would be overwhelming. What are we looking at in terms of numbers? Conservative estimates suggest 30 to 40,000 ships, Dr. Petrov replied. But our deep space sensors are detecting additional fleet movements. They may be planning to deploy over 50,000 vessels. Colonel Martinez looked up from his communication station. Admiral, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Global Defense Council. They're requesting an immediate briefing on our defensive capabilities against a force of that size. Chun sighed. It was the question everyone was afraid to ask directly. Could humanity's defensive systems, impressive as they had proven against the Fourth Fleet, handle an assault 10 times larger? Dr. Petrov, honest assessment. Can Operation Prometheus handle a fleet of 50,000 ships? Petrov was quiet for a long moment, running calculations in her head. The gravitational manipulation system can theoretically scale to handle larger numbers, but there are practical limitations. Power consumption increases exponentially with the number of targets. At 50,000 ships, we would be operating at the absolute limits of our energy generation capacity. And if something goes wrong at those power levels, catastrophic system failure becomes a significant possibility. We could lose the ability to generate the gravitational fields entirely, leaving us defenseless. Worse, an uncontrolled release of that much energy could... She didn't finish the sentence, but Chen understood. The same technology that made their defense possible could potentially destroy their entire solar system if it malfunctioned. What about our conventional forces? Are there any improvements we can make to the visible fleet? Captain Rodriguez, who had been present for the briefing via holographic link from the Defiance, spoke up. Admiral, the phase shift technology performed better than expected in the last engagement. We can retrofit additional ships with the capability, but we're limited by the availability of exotic matter for the phase generators. How many additional ships could we convert? Maybe another dozen, if we cannibalize components from other systems. Chen did the math in his head. Even with improvements, they were looking at perhaps 60 ships with advanced capabilities facing a fleet of 50,000. The numbers were daunting. Admiral, Colonel Martinez interrupted, I have Global Defense Council President Williams on the line. She's requesting immediate consultation on evacuation procedures. Chen closed his eyes for a moment. Evacuation procedures. The leadership was already thinking about the possibility that humanity might not be able to defend Earth. Put her through. President Williams appeared on the main screen, her expression showing the strain of leading a species facing potential extinction. Admiral Chun, I need to know our options if the defensive system fails. Madam President, we have contingency plans for evacuating key personnel and genetic material to the outer colonies, but the logistics of evacuating Earth's entire population. I understand the limitations, Admiral, but we need to know how much time we would have if the defense fails. Chun consulted the tactical projections. Based on hegemony tactics, they would likely target Earth's orbital infrastructure first, then proceed to planetary bombardment. If our defenses fail completely, we would have perhaps 6 hours before surface targets come under direct attack. Williams nodded grimly. 6 hours to evacuate 8 billion people. It's impossible. Madam President, Chun said carefully, there's another option we should consider. What option? Diplomatic contact with the hegemony before they arrive. If we can demonstrate that we're willing to negotiate. Admiral, Williams interrupted, you've read the intelligence reports. The hegemony doesn't negotiate with species that resist conquest. They destroy them. Normally, yes. But our victory against the Fourth Fleet changes the equation. For the first time in their history, they've encountered a species that can inflict serious losses, that might make them more amenable to alternatives to total warfare. Williams was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. Admiral, what would you propose offering them? Technological exchange, non-aggression agreements, perhaps even limited territorial concessions in exchange for Earth's security. You're talking about surrender. I'm talking about survival, Madam President. Sometimes the greatest victory is simply ensuring that your species continues to exist. The conversation was interrupted by urgent alerts from the sensor stations. Admiral, the sensor officer called out, I'm detecting multiple hyperspace signatures at the edge of the system. Unknown vessels, but the energy signatures are consistent with human technology. Chen spun toward the tactical display. How many ships? I count 47 vessels, sir. They're broadcasting human identification codes, but they're not from any fleet in our database. President Williams leaned forward. Admiral, what ships do we have that could be arriving unannounced? Before Chen could answer, the communications system activated, and a new voice filled the command center. Earth Command, this is Admiral Sarah Kim of the Colonial Defense Fleet. We're requesting immediate docking clearance for 47 vessels. Chen stared at the display in confusion. Colonel Martinez, do we have any record of an Admiral Sarah Kim? Negative, sir. No one by that name in our personnel database. The voice continued. Admiral Chun, I believe you're wondering who we are. I'm transmitting authorization codes now. You'll find they're genuine, even if they're classified at levels you might not be familiar with. Chun watched as his communications officer verified the codes. After several minutes, the officer looked up with an expression of complete bewilderment. Sir, the codes are genuine, but they're classified above my clearance level. According to the system, I'm not authorized to even see where they originate from. A new realization dawned on Chun. Dr. Petrov, when we developed Operation Prometheus, did all the research take place on Earth? Petrov's eyes widened as she understood the implication. No, I admitted. Some of the more dangerous experiments were conducted at remote facilities. Outer system research stations, classified locations. Admiral Chun, came Admiral Kim's voice again. I think it's time we had a face-to-face conversation. We have a lot to discuss before the hegemony arrives. Chun looked around the command center at his officers, then at President Williams on the screen. Humanity had just revealed that it had additional military assets that even its own military leadership hadn't known about. Admiral Kim, you're cleared for immediate docking. I'll meet you personally. As the mysterious colonial defense fleet approached Earth, Chun wondered what other secrets humanity had been keeping, even from itself. The approaching hegemony fleet was enormous and dangerous, but apparently humanity's preparations had been even more extensive than anyone had realized. The war for humanity's survival was about to begin, and Chun was beginning to suspect that both sides had significantly underestimated their opponent. 2 hours later, Admiral Chun stood in the main briefing room of Earth Defense Command, facing a woman who looked to be in her 50s, with the bearing and confidence of someone accustomed to command. Admiral Sarah Kim wore a uniform similar to standard Earth Defense Force issue, but with subtle differences that suggested it had been manufactured somewhere else entirely. Admiral Chun, Kim began, I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but circumstances required absolute secrecy until this moment. Admiral Kim, I have to admit, I'm completely confused. I thought I was familiar with all of humanity's military assets. Kim smiled slightly. Admiral, what would you say if I told you that humanity's preparations for this day began not 50 years ago, but over 2 centuries ago? Chun felt a chill run down his spine. I would say that would be impossible, since we only detected evidence of galactic civilizations 50 years ago. That's what most of humanity believes, yes. But, Admiral, what would you say if I told you that contact with alien civilizations has been occurring for much longer than that, and that certain elements within human civilization have been preparing for eventual conflict since the early 23rd century? The implications of what Kim was suggesting were staggering. Are you telling me that humanity has had contact with alien species for 200 years? Not direct contact, no. But we've been monitoring galactic communications, studying alien technology recovered from crash vessels, and observing the expansion patterns of species like the hegemony for far longer than the public knows. Kim activated a holographic display that showed star charts covering thousands of light years. Admiral, your Operation Prometheus was impressive, but it was always intended as humanity's second line of defense. Second line, the Colonial Defense Initiative that I represent has been developing technologies and strategies based on much longer observation of galactic civilizations. While your team was perfecting gravitational manipulation, we were working on something far more ambitious. Chun stared at the display as Kim highlighted dozens of star systems. What exactly are you showing me? Admiral, for the past century, we have been secretly establishing human colonies and systems throughout this sector of the galaxy. Not just research outposts or mining facilities, but full-scale military installations designed to support operations far from Earth. The display zoomed in to show detailed layouts of massive space stations, shipyards, and defensive platforms scattered across multiple star systems. Each of these installations has been developing its own specialized technologies and capabilities, some focused on advanced propulsion systems, others on exotic weaponry, still others on defensive systems that make your gravitational manipulation look primitive. Chun felt his worldview shifting as he absorbed the magnitude of what Kim was revealing. How many people know about this? Fewer than 1,000 individuals have full clearance. President Williams has partial knowledge, but even she doesn't understand the true scope of our preparations. And these installations have been developing their own fleets. Kim noted, Admiral, the Colonial Defense Initiative has been building ships for 50 years using technologies that won't appear in mainstream human science for decades. The 47 vessels I brought represent just one small task force from one installation. How many installations are there? 17 major facilities, plus over 60 smaller research and development sites. Combined, they represent the largest military-industrial complex in human history. Chen sat down heavily as he tried to process the implications. How many ships are we talking about total? Approximately 8,000 vessels of various classes, ranging from advanced fighters to dreadnought-class ships that dwarf anything in your current fleet. 8,000 ships with advanced technology, hidden from both humanity's government and any alien observers. If Kim was telling the truth, humanity's military capacity was orders of magnitude larger than anyone had suspected. Admiral Kim, why reveal this now? Why maintain the secrecy for so long? Kim's expression became grave. Because, Admiral, the hegemony fleet approaching Earth isn't just a response to your victory over the Fourth Fleet. Our intelligence suggests they're planning something far more ambitious. They're not just coming to conquer Earth. They're coming to make an example of humanity that will serve as a warning to any other species that might consider resistance. She manipulated the display to show projections of the approaching hegemony force. We estimate they're planning to use Earth's destruction as a demonstration of what happens to species that dare to fight back. Complete annihilation broadcast across the galaxy. Chun studied the projected fleet movements. And you believe this requires revealing your hidden assets? Admiral, if the hegemony succeeds in making an example of Earth, it will embolden them to expand their conquest operations. Eventually, they'll discover our hidden installations. Better to reveal ourselves now, when we can coordinate our efforts with Earth defenses. Kim stood and moved to the tactical display. Admiral, humanity's true strength has never been our technology or our weapons. It's been our ability to coordinate massive operations across vast distances while maintaining absolute secrecy. The hegemony is about to discover that they're not just fighting the population of one star system. They're fighting a human civilization that spans dozens of star systems and commands resources they never imagined we possessed. Chen looked at the display showing the positions of the hidden human installations. Each one represented capabilities that could potentially turn the tide of the coming battle. What are you proposing, Admiral? Coordination between all human forces for a defense that the hegemony will never forget. Admiral, we have the opportunity to not just defend Earth, but to deliver such a decisive defeat to the hegemony that they'll never again consider humanity an acceptable target. Kim paused, her expression becoming almost predatory. Admiral Chun, how would you feel about teaching the galaxy's greatest military power what it really means to face humanity at war? The hegemony First Fleet stretched across space like a metallic constellation, 53,000 ships arranged in the most complex military formation ever assembled. Supreme Commander Vexnathi stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, studying the tactical displays that showed humanity's star system growing larger ahead of them. Unlike the confident advance of the Fourth Fleet weeks earlier, the First Fleet approached with maximum caution. Every sensor array was active, every weapon system was charged, and every ship maintained overlapping defensive fields. Vexnathi was taking no chances with an enemy that had demonstrated such devastating capabilities. Status report, he commanded. Fleet Admiral Mordek, his second in command, stepped forward with a data tablet. All ships are in position. Supreme Commander. Long-range sensors are conducting continuous sweeps of the human system. We're maintaining formation integrity at maximum combat readiness. Any signs of the gravitational manipulation technology that destroyed the Fourth Fleet? Negative, sir. Sensor readings are consistent with standard human technology. No unusual energy signatures detected. Vexnathi frowned. Either the humans were not yet activating their advanced systems, or they had found ways to mask their energy signatures even more effectively than before. What about their fleet positions? Approximately 60 human vessels have taken up defensive positions around their homeworld, significantly larger than their force during the previous engagement, but still vastly outnumbered. Vexnathi studied the tactical display showing the human defensive formation. Something about their positioning bothered him, but he couldn't identify what seemed wrong. Fleet Admiral, those ships are positioned in a very specific pattern. Have our tactical analysts determined what advantage they're trying to gain? Moordeck consulted his tablet. The analysts believe they're attempting to create overlapping fields of fire to maximize their defensive capability against our approach vectors. And you agree with this assessment? Sir, it's the only logical explanation for their formation. But Vexnathi's instincts, honed by millennia of military experience, were telling him something different. The human formation didn't look like a desperate defensive arrangement. It looked like something else.